Mr. Bong, for your insights into gender roles and expectations in marital relationships. I'd like to invite Mr. Bong to present his information and insights into marital rape, the ultimate form of power and control.
As the moderator was introducing the panel, I realized that I'm the only person on the panel who's not coming from a legal perspective, but perhaps from a practice, social service, a counseling perspective. And so I was trying to figure out what's my role here. Let me share with you a little bit of history. I'm the president of the Society Against Family Violence. And how SAFV came about was through a conversation around lunch. A colleague from India who was with us for 2 years sat down with me and said, you know, are you seeing victims of domestic violence? And I looked at him as if he was asking a very strange question. 20 years ago, when we saw people coming for counseling, we saw them in terms of, is this person having delusional thoughts? Is this person irrational? Is this person having an obsessive-compulsive behavior? Is he depressed? All those wonderful clinical terms. But he was asking a very basic question. Are your clients experiencing problems in their marriage where there has been violence? And I thought for a moment, I said, well, you know, some of my depressed clients are depressed because they have been brutalized in their marriages. And I had to say yes. And then he asked another very uncomfortable questions. And I think questions are wonderful. You know. We should learn to ask uncomfortable questions. And the second uncomfortable question was, what are you offering these clients? And I said, well, I'm counseling these women. And oftentimes this takes the form of encouraging them to bring their spouses for counseling, which invariably we know they won't come. We are asking the abuser to say, come for counseling, you know? Come and meet a counselor who will probably tell you what you're doing is wrong. And invariably they won't turn up. Then he asked the third uncomfortable question. He said, is it effective? And we all know the answer. So arising from this discomfort that he managed to stir up over lunch, we realized that counseling abusers, perpetrators of domestic violence, wasn't sufficient. And we started to look around and ask ourselves, what else could be done? And that was the start of looking beyond our profession as counselors, as marriage and family therapists, to looking into the community. And we realized that there were many aspects of domestic violence that was missing, that was inadequate. And one of them happened to be the law. We had the Women's Charter at that point in time, which was lacking in many areas. One of them had to do with public education. And we realized that the community out there didn't know what was this thing called family violence or domestic abuse. And we felt that there were many people we needed to connect with. And SAFV started as a grassroots organization connecting with people across disciplines. This evening we have 3 individuals across disciplines who feel strongly enough about an issue, who want to do something. And it's almost like history repeating itself. And I wish them all the very best in what you're concerned about. When we started this way 20 years ago, we had to start with educating ourselves. Even though we were professionals in our field, we realized that domestic violence was something very new to us. And so we had to look abroad to try to look at people who were leaders in the field. And one of those leaders in the field happened to be, oops, I think I'm getting very far ahead of me. One of the people who were leaders in the field, it's a little bit impatient, so I apologize. We need to go back one slide. Thank you. One of the leaders in the field happened to be people who came out of Minnesota, and they developed what's called the power and control wheel as a concept that helps us organize our thinking about domestic violence. And as you can see from the slide, this internationally recognized concept began in the 1980s, and it emphasized a very multi-pronged, multidisciplinary approach to looking at this issue of violence in our community. So the power and control wheel, you have two wheels here, just to be fair. So what you will see in this diagram is they use the analogy of a wheel to describe the various types of abusive behavior people in a marital relationship might be experiencing. So the spokes of the wheel, if you like, are the forms of abuse. And you can see, if you like, from the 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, living in fear, abusing her privileges, making her be alone, denying and blaming, using the kids, being bossy, using money to abuse her, using force and threats. All the different forms of abuse. And the outer rim of the wheel, you have the words physical violence and sexual abuse. The same colleague who asked those uncomfortable questions had a very interesting phrase. He said, this is where the rubber hits the road. This is where it comes into contact with society. And oftentimes, we do not know what goes on in our neighbors' homes until we hear shouts, screams, cries of help, until we see bruises, until we see a person being hospitalized, until we see the forms of abuse taking the form of physical and sexual abuse. And that's when we become alert to the existence of these forms of abuse. What the wheel teaches us is that there are many types of abusive behavior, and one of the types identified is sexual abuse. And within that category is forced sex, marital rape. It's one of the types of abusive behavior. As we're thinking about this topic of criminalizing marital rape, I'd like to leave this thought with you, that oftentimes when you see marital rape, where you see forced sex taking place, it usually is one of the forms of abuse. And it usually has happened after a period of the victim, the wife, experiencing other forms of abusive behavior directed at her. It is when the rubber hits the road. So sexual and physical abuse occurs alongside other forms of abuse. Now, we heard a bit about coercion as one of the forms of abuse. The other very interesting thing about this power and control wheel is that it seeks to cut through a lot of the data, a lot of the research with regards to why do people in intimate relationship relate to each other in this very violent way. And the spokes of the wheel are the forms, but the hub of the wheel, the driving force of the wheel, are the words power and control. And it, in a sense, communicates to us that whenever you see this form of abusive behavior, we're looking at a perpetrator who wants to dominate, who wants to take control and power over his victim. And that's why when I think about marital rape, I see it as the ultimate form of power and control over another individual. This concept of power and control, I think, is something that we need to keep in mind and ask ourselves, is this the kind of relationships we want marriage to represent? That is a relationship of a person who's being dominated by another.